Hello everyone, please tell me. Which city are you listening from? What time is it there? I can still remember the rain that day. It had been falling steadily since the morning. A soft but constant pattering against the windows, tapping out a rhythm that was almost calming. The gray clouds hung low, shrouding everything in a dull, melancholic light. The kind of day where everything feels a little off, where even the hum of streetlights seems to hum a little too loud, a little too deep. I had no real reason for going to the store. I wasn't out of anything in particular, but I had felt this inexplicable pull, a need to step outside and stretch my legs. The air smelled fresh, tinged with the scent of wet earth, and there was a quiet stillness that made the world feel distant, almost dreamlike. As I made my way down the street, my feet splashing through puddles, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that something was subtly wrong, like I was walking through a scene where the details weren't quite lining up. The store itself wasn't anything special. A small, local convenience store that I had passed countless times without giving it much thought. It had a worn wooden sign above the door that read *Martinez's* in faded letters. The bell above the door jingled softly as I stepped inside, the smell of stale coffee and cleaning supplies mixing in the air. The lighting was dim, casting long, soft shadows across the aisles, and the shelves were stocked with everyday items, canned goods, snacks, toiletries, all arranged in that familiar, haphazard way that stores like this have. But then, something felt off at first. I thought it was just my imagination, the strange feeling that had followed me down the street seeping into this new space. But as I looked around, I realized it wasn't just a fleeting sensation. It was the people. The few people that were inside, moving in slow, deliberate motions, were staring at the shelves, their heads slightly tilted. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed they were engrossed in their own little world, their thoughts clouded by the monotony of the day. But as I looked closer, my heart began to race. Every single person in the store had the same face. Not identical, exactly, but so close, so eerily familiar that it made my stomach churn. Their faces, the contours, the expressions, the subtle lines beneath their eyes, were all mine. But it wasn't just that. They were all staring not at the shelves or the aisles, but directly at me. They didn't move. They didn't speak. They just stood there, frozen in their tracks. Their eyes locked onto mine, their faces reflecting the exact same confusion and dread that I was feeling. I tried to ignore the rising panic in my chest, convinced that I had to be imagining things. Maybe I was just tired or overwhelmed by the strange atmosphere of the day. I wandered deeper into the store, my footsteps slow, calculated. My eyes darted from one person to the next, trying to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light. But the more I looked, the more it became undeniable. Their faces my face were so distinct, so unnervingly perfect. It was as though I was surrounded by mirrors, each one slightly distorted, each one catching a different moment of my own expression. The same eyes, the same nose, the same slightly crooked smile. I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, heavy, as though something was pressing down on me. I turned to walk down another aisle, desperate to get away from the oppressive stillness. But as I did, I noticed something else. The store wasn't just full of people who looked like me, it was full of my memories. The shelves were stacked with things I had never noticed before. A brand of cereal I used to eat as a child, a shampoo I had bought on a whim last summer, an old paperback book I remembered picking up on a rainy day just like this. It was as though the entire store was filled with the echoes of my own life, the fragments of my past that I had long since forgotten, all laid out in front of me as if I had never left. I tried to walk faster, but my feet felt heavy, as if the very floor beneath me was holding me back. The bell above the door jingled again, but I didn't dare look up. I was too afraid of what I might see. As I reached the back of the store, I saw him. He was standing by the counter, his back to me, fiddling with the register. The man behind the counter, the store owner, I assumed. But when he turned to greet me, I felt the world stop. His face. My face. It was a perfect replica, like looking into a mirror. But his eyes were different, darker, hollow, as if something deep within him was gone. His lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile, more like a knowing grin, and I froze, unable to tear my gaze away from him. I wanted to ask him something, anything. I wanted to demand answers, to scream at him about what was happening. But I couldn't. I could barely breathe, let alone speak. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, curling around the corners of the room. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor, my body caught in some kind of frozen stupor. And then, without warning, I heard it. A whisper. It was faint, distant, but it felt like it was coming from everywhere, surrounding me, creeping into my mind. Leave. The word echoed in my head, the tone both a command and a plea. And as soon as I heard it, I knew I had to leave. I didn't know why, but I did. I turned on my heels and ran, my footsteps slapping against the linoleum floor, the store's silence pressing down on me like a weight. I made it to the door, the bell jingling once more as I pushed it open. The cold air hit my face, sharp and harsh, and I stepped out into the rain. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I looked back at the store, expecting to see the dimly lit interior, the strange figures inside. But it was gone. There was no store. There was no sign, nothing, just an empty lot where it had been. I didn't know what I had just experienced. Was it a hallucination? A dream? Was I losing my mind? The rain still fell, and the world outside seemed unchanged, as if nothing had ever happened. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the faces were still there, watching me. Somewhere, in the shadows, in the reflections of shop windows, in the faces of strangers I passed on the street. I felt them, all of them, just beyond my sight, watching, and then, as I turned a corner and the rain soaked through my jacket, I saw it. A reflection in a window. It was me. But it wasn't. The face staring back at me was mine. But the eyes, they were empty, hollow, like the eyes of the man behind the counter. I turned away quickly, heart racing, but I couldn't escape the feeling that the faces were everywhere now, watching, waiting, and somehow I knew I would never be able to outrun them. It was a quiet evening when it happened. The kind of evening that feels ordinary, calm, and uneventful. I had just finished a long day of work, and after a quick dinner, I decided to take a walk through the city. The night was cool, a little damp from the earlier rain, but the air was crisp, and I felt like stretching my legs after sitting all day. I pulled on my jacket, grabbed my phone, and set off toward the park. The familiar buzz of the city providing a soft hum in the background. I didn't have a particular destination in mind. I just wanted to get out, breathe, and let my thoughts drift. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few late-night stragglers hurrying home, their footsteps quick and hurried. I passed the usual spots: the corner cafe with the old wooden chairs, the bookstore with the warm light spilling out into the street, the neon sign of the laundromat that flickered every few seconds, but everything felt strangely quiet, as though the night had settled a little too thickly. I was nearing an intersection when I saw her. A woman walking in the opposite direction, her face partially hidden by a scarf. She had a certain presence, something about her that drew my attention despite the ordinary nature of the street. She was glancing at her phone as she walked, her pace steady but not rushed. When she reached the corner, she stopped and looked up. She was standing at the edge of the crosswalk, her gaze fixed on something in the distance, far beyond where I was standing. And then she pointed. At first, I thought it was just a casual gesture, but then I noticed that her finger was aimed at a building across the street, one that I had never noticed before. It wasn't particularly large, just a simple old structure with faded brickwork and small square windows. It looked out of place, like it didn't belong with the modern buildings surrounding it. But there was something strange about it, something that made me look closer. I pulled out my phone and opened the map. I thought, maybe I could learn more about this building. Maybe it was a new place I hadn't noticed before, or a historical landmark that I had never paid attention to. I typed in the address, searching for it on the map, but nothing appeared. I zoomed in, typed it in again, tried multiple variations, but the screen remained blank. No address, no details, no name, just a blank space where the building should have been. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't like the map had failed to load or there was a glitch. It was as if the building simply didn't exist at all. I looked back at the woman. She was still standing there, her finger pointed at the building, her face expressionless, as if she were waiting for me to notice something. For a moment, I felt like I should say something, ask her what was going on, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was frozen, watching her as though I were caught in a dream. Her finger dropped slowly, and she turned to face me, as if sensing my gaze. Her eyes were calm, almost too calm, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in her stare, like she knew I was looking at her. But then, just as quickly, she turned away and continued walking down the street without a word. I stood there for a long moment, the rain picking up slightly, its sound mixing with the soft hum of traffic in the background. I felt a strange pull to the building, as though it was calling to me, but I couldn't make myself move. My legs felt heavy, as though they were reluctant to take a step towards something that felt wrong, something that wasn't supposed to be there. I waited for a few more minutes, hoping for some sign that would make sense of what I had just witnessed. But the street remained quiet, the building still absent from the map, as if it had never existed. Reluctantly, I turned and walked away, my eyes lingering on the spot where the woman had stood. But the building was gone now. In its place was just an empty lot, a few trash cans and broken pavement. I kept walking, but the feeling of unease lingered. The city seemed a little quieter now, the streets a little emptier, and I couldn't shake the sensation that I was walking through a place I no longer recognized. Every corner I turned felt unfamiliar, as if something was subtly shifting, something I couldn't put my finger on, but that was slowly unraveling the very fabric of the world around me. The next day, I returned to the same street, hoping to make sense of what had happened. I wanted to see if the building would be there, or if perhaps the map had just glitched in some way. But when I reached the spot, the entire area had changed. There were new shops on either side of the street, a cafe where the building had been, and the lot was completely gone. It was as if the entire block had been remodeled overnight. I pulled out my phone and opened the map again, but there was no trace of that building. I typed in the address, trying every possible variation, but still, nothing came up. It was as if the building had never existed in the first place. The woman was nowhere to be found either, and no one seemed to remember her. No one seemed to know what I was talking about. I asked a few people nearby, just to make sure I hadn't imagined it, but their answers were the same. They had never seen her, and they didn't know about any old building on that street. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more it felt like I was chasing after something that was slipping through my fingers. The streets, the map, the woman, everything felt like it was shifting just beyond my reach. I haven't been able to find that building again. Sometimes, when I walk through the city, I still get this strange sensation that something is just off, that if I look in the right place, I might see the outline of it, just beyond the corner of my eye. But every time I search for it, it's gone. And sometimes, late at night, I catch myself staring at my phone, my finger hovering over the map, wondering if I'm the only one who can still see it, the only one who remembers it, or if I'm just losing my mind. But the most unsettling part, the woman's face. I keep thinking about it, how calm she seemed as she pointed at the building, waiting for me to notice. Almost as though she knew exactly what would happen next. I don't know why I haven't gone back. Maybe I'm afraid that the next time I do, I won't be able to leave. Or maybe, deep down, I know that whatever I saw wasn't meant to be found. It happened one evening, just like any other. The city was quiet calm, even the kind of quiet you only get after a storm, when the streets are damp, the air crisp, and the hum of traffic has died down to a mere whisper. I had just finished a meeting with a friend, and I was heading home. The walk wasn't long, just a few blocks, but I felt the weight of the day, the exhaustion creeping into my bones, urging me to hurry. I reached the crosswalk, a familiar spot where I had crossed countless times before. It was a busy intersection, the kind of place where people always seemed to rush, as though the light would change the moment they stepped off the curb. There was something comforting about the predictability of it. Step up to the line, wait for the signal, cross. It was simple. The walk signal was flashing, and I started to step forward, my mind already thinking of the warm bed waiting for me at home. My foot hit the curb, and for a split second, I felt a small sense of relief. The routine was all I needed. But as I moved, I noticed something strange. The crosswalk light changed again back to the red hand, the stop signal. I froze, my foot still hovering above the curb. I had crossed the line. I had already started walking, but the signal had changed as though I hadn't moved at all. It wasn't the kind of glitch that could happen when you're distracted. No, this was different. The light had changed asterisk for me, asterisk, but I was still standing still. I looked around quickly, trying to make sense of what was happening. The street was quiet, the sound of distant traffic filtering in, the soft murmur of voices behind me, but no one seemed to be noticing. People were still walking, still moving, despite the fact that the signal had switched. Yet I was frozen, trapped in some inexplicable moment. I could see the red hand glaring at me, the same one I had seen 1,000 times before, telling me to stop. The longer I stood there, the more unsettling the situation became. It felt as though I had been placed in some kind of stasis, like I was in a scene from a film, waiting for something to happen but unable to move. My body seemed to rebel against the urge to step forward, as if some invisible force was holding me back. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation. Was it the exhaustion? A trick of the light? Maybe I had simply misjudged my steps. But it didn't feel like any of those things. It felt wrong. Like something had shifted, and I was no longer in control of the moment. A few more seconds passed, and the feeling of being frozen in place intensified. I tried to move again. Just a step. Asterisk, one step, asterisk. But my legs wouldn't cooperate. It wasn't that they were physically incapable. No, my legs moved. They were just sluggish, reluctant, as though the space around me had suddenly become too dense to navigate. Like walking through thick fog, or moving through water that was just deep enough to slow you down, but not enough to drown. I glanced back at the light, hoping it would change again, that somehow I had missed the signal, that I could start moving like everyone else. But the light stayed red. It seemed to glare at me, as though it were mocking my hesitation, as though it were daring me to defy it. I felt a shift in the air, something faint, like the atmosphere had thickened around me. The sounds of the city traffic, pedestrians, distant sirens seemed muffled, as if I were hearing them from far away. The world was still there, but it was becoming distant, unreachable. And as I stood there, unable to move, I began to feel a strange sensation creeping over me, like I was slipping out of sync with the world. Someone touched my shoulder. I froze, the shock of it sending a cold shiver down my spine. I hadn't heard anyone approach. There was no warning, no footsteps, no voice, just a sudden presence behind me. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. The sensation of being trapped in that strange moment was too overwhelming. The hand on my shoulder was gentle, but firm, as if it belonged to someone who knew exactly what was happening, as though it had always been there. I could feel the weight of it, but I couldn't bring myself to look. My throat tightened, a slow panic creeping up on me. Was this someone I knew? Had they been there all along, waiting for me to notice? And then, without warning, the hand withdrew. I don't know how long I stood there, still, trapped in that strange moment, where time felt fractured. It felt like hours, but it was only minutes. Eventually, I must have broken free of whatever hold was keeping me in place, because I found myself standing at the curb again, my feet no longer frozen. The light had changed to green. People were crossing in front of me, the usual bustle of the city resuming. The moment was gone, but the feeling didn't leave me. It clung to me, like an aftertaste in the back of my mind. I walked the rest of the way home, but I couldn't shake the unease, the unsettling sense that something had shifted in the world, something I couldn't explain. The crosswalk light, the strange hesitation in my body, the feeling that I had stepped out of sync with reality for just a moment, it all lingered. And now, when I cross that same street, I still feel it. I feel that strange pull, that hesitation before I step into the crosswalk. It's like I'm waiting for the moment to happen again, like I'm still caught in that pause, still unsure if I'm ever really moving at all. It's as if the world is still waiting for me to step forward, to take that next step. But every time I stand there, I can't shake the feeling that I might be standing still forever, caught in some quiet, unnoticed loop where time doesn't quite move the way it's supposed to. It was a quiet, ordinary night, one of those that feels like nothing is supposed to happen. I had just finished a late shift at work, the kind where the hours seem to drag and the clock moves slower than it should. The rain had started again, a steady patter on the sidewalks, glistening under the streetlights as I walked out of the building. I wasn't far from home, just a few blocks, but after a long day, I didn't feel like walking. The cold wind nipped at my skin, urging me to hurry, so I decided to take a taxi. The street was empty, the usual hum of the city muffled by the rain, and the cars driving by splashed water from the puddles on the sides of the road. I held up my hand, signaling for a taxi. It was the kind of night when you could almost feel the loneliness in the air, the sort of quiet that clung to the world, making even the city feel still. The taxi pulled up beside me almost immediately. It seemed strange too quick, almost as if it had been waiting for me. I didn't think much of it. I was tired, and the idea of sitting back and letting someone else drive was comforting. I opened the door, slid into the back seat, and closed it softly behind me. The interior of the car was just as ordinary as I expected. The dim light inside, the scent of old upholstery mixed with the faint smell of cigarette smoke that lingered in taxis, the quiet hum of the engine running. The world outside was a blur of lights and rain, but here, inside the cab, it felt safe, familiar. But then, I noticed something strange. The driver hadn't said anything. Normally, they would ask where I was going, or make some small talk, but this driver remained silent, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. It felt odd, but I figured maybe he was just focused on the road. I settled back into my seat, pulling my jacket tighter around me, staring out the window at the blurred city passing by. A minute or so passed, and I began to feel an uncomfortable tension in the air, as if something wasn't right. The quiet was too thick, too heavy. I glanced at the rearview mirror, expecting to catch a glimpse of the driver's face. Maybe I was just imagining it, but something felt off. There was nothing. The reflection in the mirror wasn't the face of the driver at all. It was just blank. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. just the pale reflection of the rearview mirror itself, staring back at me in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked, trying to shake off the feeling that something was wrong, that I had somehow imagined what I had just seen. I looked again, this time more intently, my pulse quickening as I searched for any sign of a person. Any small movement in the mirror. Nothing. I couldn't breathe. I turned my head slowly, glancing at the front seat, at the place where a driver should have been. But there was nothing there either. Just the empty space where a face should have been, where a person should have been. The steering wheel turned gently, the car still moving forward, but there was no driver. There was no one. I wanted to scream, but the air seemed too thick, too heavy to get the sound out. My mouth felt dry, my thoughts racing, trying to understand what I was seeing or wasn't seeing. My mind kept flashing to the rearview mirror, where there was only emptiness. The road was silent now, and I could no longer hear the faint hum of the engine. It was as though I had been transported into a vacuum, where nothing made sense, where nothing was real. Panic rose in my chest. I wanted to get out, to run, to escape whatever this was. But my body wouldn't move. I sat, frozen in place, staring straight ahead, trying to ignore the gnawing dread that was creeping into my thoughts. The car kept moving, its tires splashing through the wet streets, but it didn't feel like I was going anywhere. It felt like I was trapped in an endless loop, suspended in some kind of limbo where time didn't pass. The air inside the cab grew colder, the silence more suffocating. I could hear my breathing now, sharp and quick, as if I were gasping for air. My hands trembled, and I tried to focus on anything at all, to ground myself. I thought about calling out, but my voice wouldn't come. I thought about opening the door, but my body wouldn't obey. I was a prisoner in my own fear, my mind a tangle of confused thoughts and unsettling realizations. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the car stopped. The sudden stillness was jarring, as though the world had paused, holding its breath. I looked out the window, expecting to see my destination, to see something familiar. But there was nothing. No lights, no buildings, no streets. Just darkness. The kind of darkness that swallowed everything, leaving nothing behind. I wanted to open the door, to escape, but the handle wouldn't budge. I pressed harder, but it was locked. Panic surged within me. I tugged at it, harder this time, but it refused to open. My mind was racing. Was this real? Was I dreaming? Was this some kind of joke? I looked back at the empty front seat again, the space where a driver should have been, and that's when I saw a face asterisk. A face, but not a face at all. The shape of it was there, a vague outline in the dark, but it had no features, no details. Just a pale, shifting mask where eyes should have been, where a nose, a mouth should have been. It leaned closer, the shape of it expanding, and I could hear the faintest whisper, a sound so soft it might have been my imagination, or the wind, or something else entirely. The words weren't clear, just a hiss, like air moving through empty spaces. And in that moment, I realized the face wasn't just asterisk, faceless asterisk. It was asterisk, wrong asterisk. My heart pounded in my chest, a dull roar in my ears. I tried again to open the door, this time with everything I had. I pulled, pushed, screamed silently in my head. But the face was closer now, and the whisper was louder, clearer. It was calling to me, beckoning me, pulling me toward it. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the face was gone. The door clicked open. The rain hit me as I stumbled out of the car, my legs shaking, my body trembling with the shock of it all. I looked back, expecting to see the taxi, the driver, anything. But the street was empty, the taxi gone. There was no trace of it, no sign it had ever been there. I stood there for what felt like forever, the rain soaking through my clothes, my breath shallow and quick. The world around me was still, quiet, just as it had been before. But something had shifted. Something had broken. I haven't taken a taxi since that night. The fear, the confusion, the uncertainty of what I experienced haunts me. I don't know what I saw, or why it happened. But I know one thing for certain. The face I didn't see is the face I can never forget. It was a typical evening when she appeared. I had just finished another uneventful day, the kind where nothing truly sticks with you, where everything just blends into the next. The city had that quiet, almost melancholic feeling, the air cool and fresh after the rain, the kind of night that feels like a breath of relief. I wasn't in any rush. The walk home was short, just a few blocks, but after a long day, I preferred taking the longer route. There was something calming about walking through the empty streets, the sound of my footsteps mixing with the distant hum of traffic. I was halfway down the street when I saw her. She was standing by the corner, her silhouette barely visible in the dim light of the street lamp, the glow of the rain reflecting on the pavement around her. She looked out of place, like she didn't belong in the world I was walking through. She wasn't a stranger, though. In fact, I had never seen her before, but something about her felt familiar, like I should know her. It wasn't just her appearance, there was something in the way she stood, as if she was waiting for something. I slowed down as I neared her, unsure why I felt drawn to her. She looked up at me, and I couldn't help but stop. Her eyes were calm, almost too calm, as though she knew something I didn't. She had an air of quiet authority, a sense that she understood something deeper than what was visible. "Go left," she said, her voice soft but insistent. I looked past her, down the street, trying to make sense of what she was pointing at. The road to my left seemed just like any other road, ordinary, familiar, but there was something about the way she spoke that made me hesitate. It wasn't like she was just giving directions. It felt like she was giving me an instruction, something important. And for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to ignore it. I nodded, then turned to head down the street she had pointed to. But the moment I did, something shifted. The pavement beneath my feet didn't feel right. The street, the buildings, the lights, they all started to blur, like I was walking through a painting that had begun to unravel. I glanced up, expecting to see the familiar road stretching out before me, but instead, I was met with nothing. There was no road. I stopped in my tracks, confusion spreading through me like a cold wave. The street I had just been walking on, the one she had told me to turn onto, was gone. There was nothing but an empty expanse of grass and a distant, darkened horizon. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. It was still there, an open field where a road should have been, stretching endlessly into the darkness. The streetlights didn't reach that far. There were no buildings, no cars, no signs of life. Just the grass, wet from the rain, swaying in the wind. I turned back, heart racing, but the corner where I had just been standing was no longer there either. The street, the buildings, everything I had just passed was gone. In its place was a wall of trees, dark and thick, their branches bending slightly in the breeze, casting long shadows across the ground. The city I had just walked through had disappeared, replaced by this strange, desolate landscape. I looked around, trying to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. But there was no explanation. The world felt wrong. It felt like it had been pulled apart and put back together in a way that didn't make sense. I turned again, looking for the woman, the one who had told me to go left, but she was gone too. There was no trace of her, no sign that she had ever been there at all. I started to walk, unsure of where to go. My steps were slow, hesitant, my mind racing to piece together what had just happened. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite grasp. I had to keep moving, had to find something familiar, something that made sense. But the further I walked, the more the world around me seemed to shift. Every step I took felt like I was moving further from the place I knew, further from reality. I walked for what felt like hours, though I couldn't tell for sure. The field stretched on endlessly, the trees on either side looming over me, casting dark shadows across the ground. I thought I saw shapes in the distance, faint outlines of buildings, perhaps, but when I reached them, they were nothing but empty spaces, like mirages fading as I got closer. I began to feel a growing sense of dread, like I was lost in a place I wasn't meant to be. The silence around me was suffocating, and every time I turned to look behind me, I saw nothing but the same empty landscape. There was no escape, no way to return to the street I had been on, no way to undo the choice I had made when I listened to her. The fear started to set in, creeping through my body like a cold wave, and I found myself moving faster, desperate to find something, anything that would bring me back. I wanted to call out, to scream for help, but I knew it wouldn't matter. There was no one here, no one who could hear me. I kept walking, my feet growing heavier, the ground beneath me softer, as if I were sinking with every step. The trees seemed to close in on me, their branches stretching toward me, like they were reaching for something. I could feel the weight of their gaze, the way the shadows seemed to shift and grow with every passing second. And then, in the distance, I saw it. A faint glow, a soft light breaking through the darkness. It was just a flicker at first, but as I drew closer, it grew brighter. The light was warm, inviting, like the promise of something familiar, something that could bring me back to the world I had lost. I hurried toward it, my steps quickening, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I reached the source of the light, I stopped dead in my tracks. It was just one, standing in the middle of nowhere, casting a soft yellow glow on the ground beneath it. But the road was still gone. There was no street, no path, no sign of where I had come from or where I was supposed to go. And then, From somewhere behind me, I heard it. A voice, faint but clear, as if it were coming from the wind itself. Go left. I turned quickly, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was no one there. Just the dark trees and the empty field, stretching on forever. The voice had come from nowhere and everywhere, echoing in my mind, repeating those same words, go left. But I couldn't move anymore. My body was frozen, rooted to the spot. I stood there, staring at the empty road, the flickering street lamp casting long shadows across the ground, wondering if I would ever find my way back, or if I was trapped in this place forever. The world had shifted, and no matter how much I tried to understand it, I knew that whatever had happened, whatever this place was, I had crossed a line. I had followed her instructions, but now I was lost, caught in a world where roads didn't exist, and nothing made sense anymore. It was late, much later than I had intended to be out. The office building I worked in had a way of swallowing up time, the hours blending into each other until the clock blinked a time I barely recognized. The hallways were empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing softly above my head as I walked to the elevator. The echo of my footsteps seemed too loud in the otherwise silent space. I hadn't been planning on staying this late, but one thing had led to another, and now I just wanted to get home. The elevator was empty when I stepped inside. I pressed the button for the ground floor, leaned back against the wall, and let out a deep sigh. The ride was quiet, the soft hum of the elevator filling the space. It wasn't the first time I had been in this building late at night, but it always felt different. There was something strange about how the place seemed to change after hours. Stillness, the way the empty hallways stretched on endlessly. It wasn't just the emptiness, though. It was the sense that something else was always just beneath the surface, something that didn't belong. The elevator jolted to a stop, and the doors slid open. I was ready for the usual hallway, the long stretch of carpeted floor leading to the main exit. But what I saw instead was wrong. The doors opened into a room I didn't recognize. I blinked, convinced that I was seeing things. But no, it was real. It was like stepping into a completely different space. The walls were painted a dark, muted green, the kind of color that made everything feel oppressive, like the air was thicker here. The room was filled with strange furniture, mismatched chairs, old wooden desks, and shelves lined with dusty books I couldn't quite make out. It didn't feel like any office I had ever seen, not like the modern, sleek building I worked in. It felt lived in, like it had been untouched for years, yet there was something almost too clean about it. A sharp contrast to the sterile, shiny floors of the building I was familiar with. The room was small, but it stretched further than it should have. I glanced to the right and noticed a window, but when I walked toward it, there was no view. Instead of looking out over the city like I expected, the window opened to a blank wall of stone, the kind of featureless stone you'd expect to see in an underground room. My breath caught in my throat. It felt wrong. Where am I? I turned back to the elevator, ready to step back in, but the doors had already closed behind me. I tried to press the button to call it back, but the panel didn't respond. My heart began to beat faster, the claustrophobia of the space starting to set in. I took a few tentative steps forward, trying to ignore the creeping feeling that something was wrong, that I was in the wrong place entirely. The air felt colder in here, too, despite the building being warm. I shivered involuntarily as I moved deeper into the room, my shoes squeaking softly against the old floorboards. The bookshelves were lined with old, yellowing books, but there were no labels on the spines. I reached out to touch one, the cool, worn leather of the binding sending a chill up my spine. As I ran my fingers along it, I noticed something strange. There was no title, no name, no author. Just a smooth, blank surface, as if the books were never meant to be opened. I turned around quickly, feeling a sudden surge of anxiety. The room felt too closed off, too suffocating. The walls seemed to shift around me, pulling me deeper into their strange, unfamiliar embrace. I needed to get out. I had to get back to the elevator, back to the building I recognized. But as I turned toward the door I had entered from, I froze. The door was gone. There was no sign of the elevator, no sign of the hallway, no trace of the normal building I had stepped into just moments ago. It was as though the room had absorbed everything: the elevator, the hallway, the office building itself, and I was left in some kind of twisted, parallel space. I felt a cold sweat trickle down my back. My head began to spin, the dizziness making everything around me blur. Was I losing my mind? How had I even gotten here? This room, it wasn't supposed to exist. My breathing grew shallow, and I stumbled toward the far wall, desperate to find a door, a window, anything. I ran my hands over the wallpaper, the texture smooth but fraying at the edges, like it had been there for far too long. The light above flickered for a moment, and I thought I saw a figure standing in the far corner of the room, but when I blinked, it was gone. I took another step, my pulse quickening as I tried to make sense of what was happening. The room felt larger now, as if it were stretching further out than before. It wasn't just the size that was changing, it was the way the space was bending. The way it made me feel as though I were being pulled into a different version of the world, one where I didn't belong. And then, from somewhere behind me, I heard a sound. It was faint, but unmistakable. A soft creaking, like a door slowly opening. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. But there was no door, no opening, just the same empty walls and shelves. But I could still hear it, the soft creak, like someone or something was trying to make its way into the room. I moved toward the sound, my footsteps tentative, my eyes darting around the room in a panic. I reached the corner where the sound had come from, and I nearly tripped over a piece of furniture I hadn't noticed before: a small wooden chair, oddly placed in the center of the floor, facing away from me. The creaking grew louder now, more pronounced, as if the chair itself were shifting, groaning under some unseen weight. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know what was happening. But something inside me urged me to turn the chair around, to face whatever was making that sound. And so, I did. When I turned the chair, I gasped in horror. There was no one sitting in it. There was no one behind it. The chair was simply empty. But the back of it, where a person's head would be, was covered in dark, smudged fingerprints, handprints, as if someone had pressed their hands against it, but with no body to be found. The air seemed to grow heavier, thicker, as if the room itself were closing in on me. I backed away slowly, feeling the walls tighten around me. My heart was pounding, my breath ragged as I searched for any trace of the elevator, the hallway, the world I had left behind. But it was gone. I was alone in this room, a room that didn't belong. I turned once more, trying to find something that made sense, but all I saw was the same empty space. And then, just before I lost myself completely, the room whispered, "Leave." The voice was faint, distant, like a gust of wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was a voice clear and sharp, but carrying an edge of something darker, something old. I didn't wait to hear anything else. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, running toward where I thought the elevator should be, only to find the room stretching endlessly before me, as though it had never been designed with an exit in mind. I don't know how long I stayed there, how long I wandered through that endless room, trying to find my way back. The last thing I remember is the lights flickering out, and the world going dark. It was late, the kind of night where the city feels like it's holding its breath. The streets were mostly empty, save for the occasional car passing by and a few people in the distance, hurrying to wherever they were going. I was walking home after a late dinner, the rain having just let up, leaving the pavement slick and glistening under the streetlights. The cool night air felt refreshing against my skin, but there was something about it, something about the stillness, that made me feel like I wasn't quite alone. As I was walking along, lost in my own thoughts, something caught my eye. A phone, lying face down in the gutter. It wasn't uncommon to see things like that, late at night, an abandoned item, forgotten in the rush of a busy day. But something about the phone stopped me. It wasn't cracked, wasn't dirty. It looked perfectly normal, almost too normal. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should pick it up. I looked around, but the street was quiet, no one in sight. Curiosity won out, and I bent down to pick it up. The cold, smooth surface of the phone was a strange contrast to the damp air around me. I turned it over in my hand, checking the screen. The device was still on, the screen bright with a locked home page, but there were no notifications, no messages, no signs of a recent call. I glanced around once more before pressing the home button. The lock screen appeared, and there was nothing unusual about it, just the time, the date, and a faint wallpaper of a beach, the sun setting over the ocean. But then, a strange thing happened. The screen flickered, and a new notification popped up. It wasn't a message. It wasn't an alert. It was a call. The name that appeared on the screen made my stomach drop. It was my name. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange chill crawl up my spine. The phone was calling me. Asterisk, how could that be? Asterisk, I hadn't given anyone my number recently. I didn't recognize the number on the screen, and it seemed impossible that someone could have accessed my phone without my knowing. I looked around again, more frantic this time, wondering if someone was watching me, playing some cruel trick. But the street remained empty, silent, the rain having passed, but the world still holding that eerie stillness. My finger hovered over the green accept button for a moment. A voice in my head told me to ignore it, to leave it alone, but I couldn't. The pull was too strong. The curiosity was unbearable. I pressed accept. For a moment, there was nothing, no sound, no movement, just the quiet hum of the phone in my hand. Then, as I held it closer to my ear, I heard something. a faint whisper, almost inaudible, but unmistakable. It sounded like my name. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling, though I tried to sound calm. The silence stretched on, the only sound coming from the distant hum of the city and my heartbeat thudding in my ears. Then, slowly, the voice came again, louder this time. "I know you can hear me." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. My breath caught in my throat, and I pulled the phone away from my ear for a second, staring at it as if waiting for it to stop ringing. But it didn't. It just continued to buzz softly, like a distant heartbeat. I glanced around again. Still no one. My pulse quickened. I should have hung up. I should have thrown the phone back into the street, walked away, and never looked back. But for some reason, I couldn't do it. "I'm here," the voice said again. But this time it sounded more personal. The words felt like they were meant just for me, their meaning sinking deep into my chest. It was my voice. I froze. I couldn't move. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. The phone was still pressed to my ear, the call still ongoing, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. I just stood there, my eyes wide, staring at the empty street, waiting for something, anything to make sense of what was happening. But nothing did. "Why are you standing there?" the voice continued. "You know what you have to do." It was my asterisk voice, but it wasn't. It was like hearing a version of myself, one that wasn't mine, one that came from somewhere else. The words were clipped, distant, as if they were coming from a place I couldn't reach, a place I wasn't supposed to be. I looked down at the phone. The screen was still locked. It wasn't showing anything except the call, the number I didn't recognize, and the strange notification with my name on it. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to throw it away, but my hands wouldn't move. The voice spoke again, this time softer, almost comforting. "You don't need to be afraid. I'm here. I'm waiting." Asterisk, waiting for what? Asterisk, I wanted to scream the question, but the words stuck in my throat. The phone's screen flickered again, and then, as if the voice had answered my silent question, the screen shifted. A new notification appeared, a message. The text was simple. Asterisk, come closer. Asterisk, I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to know. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I felt my hands start to shake. But my feet started moving, almost against my will, as if the phone's message had reached into me, pulling me in some unseen direction. I stumbled forward, my legs unsteady beneath me, my body almost acting on its own. I looked down at the phone, still clutched in my hand, the screen now flickering with a new message. Asterisk, you're already too close. Asterisk, my breath hitched. I wasn't sure if the words were meant to reassure me or terrify me, but I couldn't stop moving. I didn't even know where I was going. I couldn't think. I just had to follow the voice. I walked faster, my feet moving almost mechanically, until I found myself standing in front of an old crumbling building I didn't recognize. The door was slightly ajar, and the air around it felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't place. I stared at it, still holding the phone, the voice now completely silent. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the door, but something in me told me that I had to go in, that I had to know. The phone in my hand seemed to hum, the weight of it pressing on my palm. I stepped forward. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound scraping against the silence. And then, before I could go any further, the phone vibrated in my hand. A final message blinked on the screen. Asterisk, I'm here. And now, so are you. Asterisk, and as the door closed behind me, I realized I had never really been alone. Not once. It started like any other conversation between us, casual and lighthearted. We were sitting at our usual spot in the corner of the cafe, the one with the large window that overlooked the quiet street. It had become our routine over the past few months, catching up after long days, sipping our coffee, talking about everything and nothing. But on that day, something felt different. I think this place is haunted, she said, stirring her cappuccino slowly. Her voice was casual, almost like she was telling me it was going to rain tomorrow. I paused mid-sip, my cup halfway to my lips, and looked at her. What? I chuckled, assuming she was joking. She wasn't smiling. Instead, she stared into her cup, her expression distant, almost unreadable. I followed her gaze toward the old wooden beams on the ceiling, the creaky floorboards, and the small faded paintings that lined the walls. It was a charming little place, certainly a bit worn, but nothing about it screamed haunted to me. Yeah, haunted, she said again, this time more seriously. I've been coming here for months, and I swear, I feel something off. Sometimes I hear things, or feel like someone's watching me. I laughed, though there was a knot in my stomach. I didn't believe in that kind of thing. Ghosts, spirits those, were things you saw in movies, not something that happened in real life. You've been reading too many ghost stories, I teased, leaning back in my chair. This place is just old. It creaks. It's probably the floorboards. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she took a long sip of her drink, still staring out the window at the empty street, the rain starting to fall softly outside. Her silence felt heavy, and I could tell she wasn't just making this up. There was something in her voice, something unshakable, that made me feel uneasy. But I pushed the thought aside. I'm serious, she said quietly, her voice a bit lower now. I don't know how to explain it, but I'm telling you, there's something about this place. You might not notice it, but I do. There's a presence here. And sometimes, I swear, it feels like it's waiting. I raised an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly. You've got me intrigued, I said, playing along. But there's no way this place is haunted. It's just a cafe. What? Are we going to see a ghost or something? She smiled weakly. I don't know. But maybe you will, one day. You've been coming here for how long now? And nothing strange has ever happened. I thought back to the times I'd been here, nothing out of the ordinary. Just the usual clinking of coffee cups, the hum of quiet conversations, the smell of espresso and pastries. It was just a cafe, a place to escape the busyness of life for a moment, to slow down. But that night, I couldn't shake her words from my mind. Asterisk, what if there was something to it? Asterisk, the next time I went to the cafe, I tried to pay attention to everything, but nothing seemed amiss. The chairs scraped against the floor. The bell above the door jingled when someone entered. The barista greeted me with a smile. The place felt warm, inviting even, like it always had. Still, a part of me couldn't help but look over my shoulder every now and then, half expecting to see someone or something watching me. I didn't think much of it though. That was until I started feeling it myself, the unease. It was subtle at first, like a tug at the edge of my consciousness. A flicker in the corner of my eye when I looked away from the window, a shadow passing in the hallway when I was alone. But when I glanced back, there was nothing. It didn't help that the cafe's ambience had this old-world charm to it, creaky wooden floors, mismatched furniture, and the soft crackling of the fireplace in the corner. It was easy to get lost in the atmosphere, the dim lighting, the quiet murmur of voices. But then, I started to notice the little things. There were whispers, quiet murmurs that would rise and fall just beyond hearing range. Not from the customers. It came from somewhere deeper in the cafe, from the walls, the very air itself. It was so faint that when I tried to listen closely, it would stop, but I couldn't deny that it was there. Then one evening, I saw it. I was sitting at the table closest to the window, staring at my phone, absent-mindedly scrolling through emails. I heard the soft footfalls of someone walking by me and looked up, expecting to see a customer moving past. But there was no one. The hallway leading to the back of the cafe was empty. I shrugged it off. Maybe someone had gone into the restroom. But then, I noticed the temperature change. The air around me seemed to grow colder, a chill that settled into my bones despite the warmth of the room. I looked up, trying to shake off the discomfort. But then I saw it, a figure. It was faint, like a distortion in the air, but it was there. Standing at the far end of the room, just before the staircase leading up to the second floor. A woman, dressed in what looked like an old-fashioned gown, her face obscured by the dim light, her form slightly blurred, as though she didn't quite belong. I blinked, and the figure was gone. My heart raced, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the room pressing in on me. I looked around, but the other patrons seemed oblivious to the strange cold that had overtaken the cafe. I could feel my breath quicken, but I didn't want to leave. I couldn't. I glanced toward the back of the cafe again, where I had seen the woman, and my stomach dropped. The door to the old storage room at the far end of the hallway was cracked open, just a sliver. I hadn't seen it open before. The door had always been shut. Something inside me, something primal, told me not to go. But curiosity got the better of me. I set my phone down, stood up, and slowly walked toward the hallway. As I approached the door, I could hear the faintest sound, a low, echoing whisper. I paused, my heart thumping in my chest. The door creaked, just slightly, as if something or someone was waiting for me on the other side. I reached for the door handle. My fingers brushed against the cold metal, and for a second, I thought I heard a voice, faint, yet unmistakable. "You shouldn't have come." I jerked my hand back, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to. I ran out of the cafe, my feet stumbling over the pavement, the cool night air cutting through the silence. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to try. But as I turned back one last time, I saw her standing at the window, the woman from inside. She was watching me, her face still obscured in the shadow, but her eyes were clear, and they were waiting. The next day, when I passed by the cafe again, the door was closed. The windows were dark. There was no sign of anyone inside. It was as if the place had never existed at all. I never went back, and I don't think I ever will. It started as an ordinary day, like any other. The kind of day where the sun is bright, the air is warm, and everything feels just right. But in the back of your mind, you know there's something just a little off. It was one of those days when the world seemed to hum with a quiet, unspoken energy, a feeling that you couldn't quite place. I had no reason to suspect that the events of that day would change my life forever. I was walking down the main street, headed to a local cafe for my usual afternoon coffee. The sidewalk was lined with stores and billboards, the usual advertisements plastered all around. I had seen them 100 times before: sales, discounts, new movies, new products, all designed to grab your attention. But as I passed one of the larger billboards, something made me stop. It wasn't the ad itself. It was the image on the billboard. It was my face. I froze for a moment, my steps faltering. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. Sure enough, there I was, smiling back at me, my picture plastered across the billboard in full color. I was wearing the same clothes I had on that day, my favorite jacket. The one I wore all the time, but it wasn't the image that bothered me. It was the asterisk context, asterisk. The ad was for a product I didn't recognize. A new smartphone, or maybe some kind of tech gadget. But that wasn't the part that made my stomach twist. The part that sent a shiver through me was the date at the bottom of the billboard. It was a small print, almost easy to overlook, but I caught it. Asterisk, September 5th, 2026, asterisk. That's 3 years from now. The picture was asterisk taken in the future, asterisk. I stared at it, unable to tear my eyes away. I had never posed for a photo like that, at least not for an ad. I didn't remember anyone taking my picture for this billboard, much less the image being used in a future ad. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was some kind of trick, a random image pulled from social media. But no, this wasn't something I had posted. It wasn't something anyone I knew had taken. I reached into my pocket, fumbled for my phone, and snapped a quick photo of the billboard. I had to show someone. I had to prove to myself that this wasn't just my imagination running wild. As soon as the photo was taken, I opened my camera roll and checked the image. The moment the photo loaded, my blood ran cold. The photo on my phone, asterisk, the same exact photo, asterisk, was timestamped with today's date. But there was something else. In the background of the photo on my phone, there was a crowd of people gathered around me, all wearing the same dark clothing, standing in what appeared to be a crowd at some kind of event. I didn't recognize them. I didn't even remember being at an event like that. And there was more. In the corner of the image, just barely visible, I could make out a sign, another billboard, one that wasn't there. The sign was blank in the real world, but in the photo on my phone, It showed a digital countdown to a specific event. Something happening asterisk 2 weeks from today. Asterisk. I felt my chest tighten. I had to know more. I turned back to the billboard, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming faster. I scanned the ad again, trying to find something I had missed, something that would explain this. But there was nothing, just my smiling face and the tagline for the product. I was shaking now, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. I took a few steps back, trying to put some distance between me and the billboard. But as I did, something caught my eye movement, just to the right of the ad. It was subtle at first, but I saw it clearly now, a figure. I turned sharply, eyes searching the crowd. It was a man, standing off to the side, watching me. His face was obscured by a dark hood, but I could see the faint outline of his face beneath the fabric. He wasn't just standing there. He was waiting as if he was expecting me to notice him. For a moment, everything felt frozen in place, as if the world around me had stopped moving. My heart hammered in my chest, and I instinctively took a step back. I wanted to turn and run, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was stuck in some strange, surreal moment. Then, without a word, the man lifted his hand and pointed at me. A chill ran through me, and my breath hitched. The motion was so sudden, so deliberate, that I felt the blood drain from my face. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to turn away and walk in the opposite direction. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. There was something about him, something deeply unsettling, that made me feel as though he knew more about the situation than I did. And then, as if on cue, the man vanished. In an instant, he was gone, disappearing into the crowd like he had never been there at all. I stood there, still frozen, my mind racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. I looked back at the billboard, my eyes scanning the image of myself one last time. The image didn't change. It stayed the same. But now, everything felt different. I didn't know what this meant. I didn't know how to explain it, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was pulling me toward that future. Toward whatever it was that had been captured in that photo. I felt a strange compulsion to keep moving forward, to find out more, to see what came next. The days passed in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the billboard, the photo on my phone, the man who had been watching me. I tried to tell myself that it was all just a coincidence, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. I had seen something that couldn't be explained. I kept the photos saved on my phone, just in case. And as the days passed, I kept seeing more signs. Small things, strange occurrences that seemed to echo the image I had seen. The countdown sign on the other billboard that hadn't been there before. People who looked familiar but whose faces I couldn't place. The feeling that the world around me was slowly slipping into a reality I didn't recognize. The day came. September 5th, 2026, the date on the billboard. I had no choice but to go to the location from the photo. It felt like fate, like I was being drawn there by some invisible force. As I walked toward the place, I could feel my heart racing, my palms sweaty, my mind overwhelmed with the sensation that I had stepped into a moment that had been preordained. And when I reached it, when I saw the crowd gathered in front of me, I realized something. The billboard wasn't just showing my future. It was showing me the moment I was about to live. I saw myself in the crowd, in the same clothes, the same expression, the same everything. The future wasn't something I was walking toward, it was something I had already stepped into. And somewhere, in that crowd, I could feel the eyes of the man watching me again. It was the kind of evening that crept up on you. The quiet kind where the world seems to slow down and the shadows stretch longer than usual. The streets were empty, save for the occasional car passing by, its headlights casting eerie beams across the damp pavement. I had been out for a walk, my mind wandering aimlessly, trying to shake off the weight of the week. The city felt a little too quiet, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. I hadn't planned to stop by the park, but my feet led me there anyway, as if the familiar path was pulling me in. The gate creaked softly as I pushed it open, and I stepped into the park, the scent of wet grass and earth filling the air. The soft chirping of crickets mixed with the distant hum of city traffic, creating a strange sense of calm. I walked along the path, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, and then I saw her. She was standing by the old oak tree near the center of the park, her back to me. At first, I thought she was just another late-night wanderer, lost in thought, enjoying the peace of the evening. But there was something about her, something out of place. She was dressed in a simple white dress, the fabric fluttering slightly in the breeze. But it wasn't the dress that caught my attention. It was the way she stood perfectly still, as though she were waiting for something. I stopped walking, unsure why I felt the sudden urge to just watch her. She wasn't moving, and I could feel the oddest sensation, like the world had shifted slightly off-kilter. Something wasn't right, though I couldn't explain what it was. I took a few more steps, trying to pass by her without drawing attention to myself. But just as I neared her, she turned. The motion was so sudden, so fluid, that I almost jumped. Her eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was a quiet intensity to her gaze, like she could see right through me, but it was more than that. It felt like she was waiting for me to notice something. And then she spoke. "You shouldn't stay here too long." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried in the stillness of the night. The words were simple, but they hit me with a strange weight, like she knew something I didn't. I couldn't speak at first. I just stared at her, unsure how to respond. Who was she? Why did she seem so familiar? But before I could say anything, she turned away and began walking toward the edge of the park. I watched her, still frozen in place, until she disappeared around the corner of the path. It wasn't until she was out of sight that I finally managed to move. I shook my head, as though trying to clear the strange feeling that had settled in my chest, and turned to walk the other way. But then something stopped me. I turned back to look at the spot where she had been standing, and that's when I saw it. There, on the ground, were faint footprints in the grass. They were barely visible at first, just small impressions on the wet earth. But as I looked closer, I realized they weren't like any footprints I had ever seen before. They were clear, almost too clear, as if someone had just walked away from that spot moments ago. But here's the strange part, there were no footprints leading away from the tree. They were only in front of it, as if she had walked toward it, but never actually left. It was as though she had vanished into thin air, but her footprints, her footprints, remained behind. I took a step closer, my curiosity and unease growing in equal measure. The footprints were fresh, the edges still damp from the evening rain. They were perfectly formed, delicate, as if they had been made only moments before. I knelt down to get a better look, my breath shallow, and realized that the prints were too perfect, too neat. They didn't look like natural footprints. They looked placed asterisk. I stood up quickly, a knot forming in my stomach. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked straight out of the park. But my feet were frozen to the ground, as if something was holding me in place. I glanced around, but there was no one else in sight. The park was empty, save for me and those strange, haunting prints. And then, before I could stop myself, I looked back down at the ground. The footprints were still there, but now they were moving. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the prints seemed to shift, the edges deepening slightly as though someone was walking backward, retracing their steps. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. I looked up, expecting to see her, but the park was still empty. The only sound was the wind whispering through the trees, carrying with it the distant echo of a voice, faint and barely audible. "You shouldn't stay here too long." I felt the chill creeping over me again, that strange feeling of being watched, of being part of something that I didn't understand. Her footprints moved slowly toward me, and I realized, with a sudden sense of panic, that they were headed straight for the spot where I was standing. I turned and ran, my feet pounding the gravel, my breath coming in frantic gasps. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept running, past the empty swings, past the benches, toward the gate. The city lights were a blur in the distance, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the park was stretching out behind me, pulling me back into its strange, empty void. I reached the gate, threw it open, and didn't stop running until I was back on the main street, gasping for air. My mind was spinning. What had I just experienced? Who was she? And what had she meant by those words? I didn't look back. But the next morning, when I passed by the park on my way to work, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The grass where the footprints had been was perfectly smooth again. There was no sign of the strange marks, no indication that anything unusual had happened at all, except for one thing. At the edge of the path, where I had first seen her standing, there was a single, delicate print in the wet grass. One step, just like the others, leading nowhere, and then nothing. No other footprints. No other signs of her. Just one. It was as though she had never walked away at all. It was one of those mornings when the world feels like it's still waking up. The air heavy with the lingering chill of the night. The kind of morning that makes you want to stay in bed just a little longer. To curl up with a cup of coffee and let the day unfold slowly. But I had to go to work, and the world outside wasn't going to wait for me. I stepped into the kitchen and looked out the window, the one that faced the street. It wasn't a particularly scenic view, just the usual stretch of sidewalk, a row of tired buildings, and the occasional car passing by. The fog had settled in overnight, thick and heavy, blanketing the world in an eerie, milky haze. The streetlights were still on, casting dim halos through the mist, but everything seemed muffled, as though the world was holding its breath. I took a sip of my coffee, my eyes lingering on the window. Something about the fog felt different today. It wasn't just the usual fog that comes with the early morning. This one seemed to cling to everything. The trees, the lampposts, even the cars, everything looked indistinct, as if the world beyond the window was slowly fading away. I took another sip, my thoughts drifting, when I noticed something strange. The reflection, it wasn't what I expected. The window, normally a simple pane of glass that reflected the mundane details of the room behind me, was showing something else. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, the fog causing some distortion. But no, there it was again. The street outside was reflected perfectly in the glass, but instead of the usual muted colors of the morning, it was covered in a thick fog that seemed to pulse, swirling like something alive. I blinked. The reflection in the window didn't match the view outside. The street was empty, as it had been just a moment ago, the fog rolling over the sidewalk in soft, lazy curls. But in the reflection, the street was different. The figures in the fog moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, like shadows creeping across the pavement. They weren't clear, no distinct faces, no features, but they were there, just beyond the edge of the glass, watching, waiting. I shook my head, trying to shake off the unease that began to creep up my spine. It was just the fog, just a reflection, a trick of the light. I turned my attention back to the coffee cup in my hand, hoping to distract myself, but I couldn't look away. Something about the reflection was pulling me in, a strange pull that I couldn't ignore. I took a hesitant step closer to the window, peering through the mist at the shapes in the glass. The figures, no longer moving like shadows, seemed to be standing still now, as if they were aware of me, watching. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, feeling the coolness seep through my skin. The fog outside, thick and relentless, swirled around them, but the figures remained unaffected. I took another step forward, my breath catching in my throat. The figures in the window weren't just reflections anymore, they were becoming more defined, clearer. They weren't just standing in the fog. They were emerging from it. The street outside seemed to fade as they stepped closer, the fog surrounding them as though they were the ones creating it. They didn't have faces, not exactly, but there were outlines, hints of shapes in the mist that I couldn't quite make out. And then, one of them moved. The figure turned, just slightly, and for a moment, I thought it was looking at me. I gasped, stepping back, my heart racing. My reflection in the window seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if the glass itself was bending to their will. The fog outside thickened, swirling more rapidly, and I felt the temperature in the room drop, the air growing colder around me. I looked away from the window, trying to pull myself together. It was just fog. It was just a trick of the light. But the chill in the air lingered, pressing in on me. I could feel it on the back of my neck, creeping down my spine. I turned back to the window, and this time, I couldn't ignore what I saw. The street outside was still fogged over, but the figures in the reflection were closer now, much closer. They were standing right behind me, their blurry outlines just visible in the glass. I could hear their movements, soft, deliberate steps, like they were walking toward me. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest, expecting to see them standing in the room with me. But there was nothing. No one. The room was empty, the only sound, the soft hum of the refrigerator and my quickened breath. I turned back to the window. The street outside was still empty, nothing but fog, but the reflection was different now. The figures were gone, replaced by something else. The reflection in the glass was no longer the street outside, but a hallway. A dark, narrow hallway. The walls were peeling, the floorboards old and cracked, and the air in the reflection felt stale, as though it hadn't been breathed in years. The hallway stretched on into the distance, dark and endless, with no light at the end. I stepped back, my heart thundering in my chest. I knew I should walk away. I should pull the curtains shut, walk out of the room, get away from this thing that was happening, this thing I couldn't explain. But I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the floor as I stared at the reflection, at the hallway that shouldn't have been there. And then, from the depths of the reflection, a figure appeared. It was standing at the far end of the hallway, just at the edge of the darkness, too far to make out clearly, but I could feel its presence. I could feel its gaze, heavy and suffocating, like it was waiting for me to make the next move. I tried to look away. I tried to turn off the light, close the window, anything to stop myself from seeing what I was seeing. But I couldn't. The figure in the reflection took a step forward, and I felt a cold breath on my skin, as if something were standing right behind me. The chill spread, and for the first time, I couldn't breathe. I turned, my head spinning, and ran for the door. The hallway in the reflection grew darker, the figure closer, its shape slowly becoming clearer. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. The last thing I saw before I slammed the door shut was the reflection, the empty street, the fog, and the faint outline of a figure standing in the mist, waiting for me.